walk away. You're more than welcome to chip in when you want, and I welcome back and forth. So if we then carry this on further, if we say that, look, we're dependent on something else, that's dependent on something else, that's dependent on something else, would you agree that there cannot be an infinite regress of dependent things?
I feel like there can be a circular sort of dependency. Like, I think there's a word for that. Biology, I forgot. But like, something can be dependent on something while that is dependent on the original.
Okay. So isn't a similitude comes to mind is like a mother giving birth to herself?
No, I wouldn't say so.
Because if you're saying something, it's like me, I'm dependent on something that's dependent on something, and then it comes back to me. So it's like I'm dependent on the thing that was dependent on me.
Yeah.
Do you see? So it's circular reasoning, isn't it?
I think, but that's okay. I think that is like a sustainable circle.
That's okay. When you say it's okay, you mean in a real sense or in a mathematical sense? This is where this mathematics is going to come in, isn't it?
I'm not sure. I'd still say both. Because
Let me give you an example. Yeah. Let's just say, in order for me to give the bottle to you, I have to ask his permission. He has to ask his permission. He has to ask his permission. He has to ask his permission. If it goes on ad infinitum, would I ever give the bottle to you?
No, I guess.
No. In order for me to give the bottle to you, there has to be an end to the chain, isn't it? So that's a real world example. So I guess what I'm saying is that even us as dependent beings, there has to be an end to this chain for us to even exist. Otherwise, again, we're left in a linger. Do you see? The fact that we're here has to mean that there's an end to that chain. And it's the end to that chain that philosophers call a necessary being. As we got Leibniz, you got Aristotle, he'll call it the prime mover or something. So what do you think about this? Does it make sense that we cannot have an infinite regress of dependent things?
I guess
for us
I
to
would
even
agree
exist.
with you in that sense, but I still don't see. Okay, say that there is a necessary being. It doesn't have to be a being that cared about humanity. I still believe
No
that
problem.
it's way more likely that it just happened by accident, because it's
No problem.
You know the thing about how if there's a puddle and it fills a hole in the ground, it thinks, oh wow, this hole was made for me. It fits me exactly.
Yes.
And it doesn't. It fit the hole, not the other way around.
Right.
That's what's kind of happening.
I get that. Let's compound it. Let's build it, scaffold it. Let's not get to the Abrahamic God so far. For now, let's just stick with. So we have dependent beings. We can't have an infinite chain of dependent things. So logically, there has to be an end to that chain. Yeah, which philosophically is known as the necessary being. Yeah, even when you look at existence, they say there's three types of existence. Yeah, an impossible existence, a necessary existence, and a dependent existence. Yeah. So the only other existence at the end of that chain philosophically would be a necessary being. You said that makes sense, yeah?
Yeah.
Now,
I still agree with his thing more.
okay, so let's just say but his thing would be that there is.
I think for the sake of this conversation, let's say that I agree with you, just because I'm interested to see where you're going with
Okay,
this.
no problem. The only thing when it comes to circular dependency, it's like me saying I'm dependent on the microphone. The microphone is dependent upon him. He's dependent upon me. So him dependent on me, I'm dependent. So then that doesn't explain where I'm from. That just takes the chain to somebody else that's dependent, and then it just comes back to me. It's known as the cosmic bootstrap, which means you're trying to pull yourself up using your shoelaces.
Yeah.
So I'm really trying to.
I'm having so much trouble right now.
Yeah. Is it all right if we move to the side somewhere?
Sure,
Yeah.
let's
She's saying,
louder than my thoughts are.
you know what I mean? Louder than there's somebody said she's louder than the voices in my head.
What are all the cameras for, by the way?
Oh, the camera, because it's a speaker's corner, what people do is, because people come to discuss about religion, theology, philosophy. So these things get recorded and they get shared, and it's just people like the fact that people are discussing about topics and people find these discussions
Well,
fascinating.
I'm just wondering if it's going to end up on YouTube with like atheist gets owned.
Yeah, no, that you know that's why I said I'm not here to kind of catch you out. You can tell from my tone. I'm not kind of, but you said aha, because I could have easily with a circular thing that would have been easy. But like, I'm not here to kind of grab you and be like, oh, so do you mean this? Aha, it's atheist. But to be honest, I don't find those sorts of discussions productive. My aim is, like, I might be able to learn from you, you might be able to learn from me. I think that would be the greatest victory. Or for us to even leave this gathering with less biases about somebody that thinks something different. Or sometimes I may have studied something, spent time studying it, and you might be able to pick it up from me and be like, you know what, that's really helpful actually. So I mean, that's what I like. And like I said, if you feel uncomfortable, just all you have to do is just walk away. It's literally as simple as that. So yeah, so we'll come back to the circular thing. I think that will be interesting. But I like your kind of, you know what, it just looks. Sometimes I check these on camera; they don't look very nice. So I want to just do it a bit like that. Right. So when we have this necessary being, so the necessary being, we agree that it's the end of the chain. So if it's the end of the chain, it makes it independent. Yeah, because everything depends upon it. It doesn't depend on anything. If it did, it would make it dependent itself. Hence, the chain would have to carry on. So it's independent. I would also argue, and feel free to jump in when I've said it, I would also argue that it has power. Because power gets power from that which it... So, let's just say I create something. That will get power from me. Yeah? So, power is connected. So, there's a chain even of power as well. So we depend upon something for power, that depends on something, so that naturally concludes that the necessary being also has to have power, can't be devoid of power. So I would say independence, power. I would also say will. It also needs to have will. The fact that we have come into being, that you see the universe, you see planets, you see creatures in the universe, the fact that it was created at one time and not another time means that there is some sort of choice being made. When there was nothing for something to be done, there has to be some sort of volition, some sort of choice being made. And then I would also argue that this necessary being is also wise. Yeah, and I'll say, and it's good you said that. I think you're being a bit too polite, which I appreciate, but I'll just read your micro expression.
Yeah.
I'll read your micro expression. So when you say wise, the reason why you may have an issue is because you might kind of think that it's more like a human kind of characteristic, or where did you get wisdom from? I would say when you look at what's around you, would you agree that there is a degree of intelligence?
Do you mean like
Complexity.
society? Well,
Complexity, purpose.
yes.
Yeah.
Are you going into the like, this is designed by God? This is so complex, it has to be made by a higher power.
No, what I'm saying is that because of the intelligence and the complexity, or at the very least, consistency within nature. Yeah, because for us to even do science, that we have to accept that there is a degree of consistency in nature. The three technical terms are that the universe is uniform, regular, and stable for us to even do science. Because if it wasn't uniform, regular, stable, I mean, the microphone will randomly be combusting, trees will be floating. There has to be, like, we get up the next day and copper still conducts electricity. Water is still two hydrogens and an oxygen. So for us to see this, I would argue that it also means that the necessary being is also wise, yeah, and intelligent. Because, and I would also say that an individual that's wise would not create things without purpose. It's not a consequence of wisdom for somebody to create something with no purpose in mind, directionless, purposeless, and just leave it and abandon it.
Do you believe humans are wise?
I believe we are wise, yes.
But don't humans make things just randomly without particular purpose?
That depends. When you say why humans do something, do you believe we have absolute free will, or do you believe in deterministic free will?
Deterministic free will being kind of, it's predetermined.
Yeah, it's all determined by the forces and everything around us. Like, I'm only moving my arm because, you know, the muscles in my arms did this, then something triggered in my mind that was linked to something that I saw, blah, blah, blah. So all to do with stuff that's deterministic. There is something in the middle, by the way. Maybe that's what we believe as Muslims. Is we believe that there is determinism, free will, but there's also something that marries the two together called compatibilism, which you can. There's a bit of both. Like, there's certain things that determine. Like, I can choose to stand on one leg, but I can't choose to stand on no legs. So there's the free will, but then determinism. There's something.
Mine would be in the middle. I can't.
Compatibilism. Yeah, exactly. So coming back to your question, I think it would depend on determinism. Certain people would argue that human beings are determined. So although you may not consciously be doing something, you'd have certain psychologists, they would say that no, it's your conditioning from your first 6-7 years of your life. Who's that famous psychologist? His name's, I'm going to kick myself later. It's going to be one of those things. Okay. It's so annoying.
I don't know psychologists at all.
Yeah. So it's always determined on something. Why we're doing something, it could be to relieve stress, it could be because we're frustrated. A person may think that they're doing something, but even, you know, when you go to like a therapist, there's like an ink blot that they show you.
The Rorschach tests.
Yeah. It looks something totally random, but they want to see what you can read into it or whatnot. The method to the madness, in other words.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say that there could be an argument about, but I would say that we don't have the characteristics that the necessary being has. We might be wise to a certain level, but I would say that when you look at the wisdom that's in creation, that wisdom, that intelligence far supersedes the intelligence that we have as human beings. So what do you think about what I've said so far? Logically, we're not progressing at the moment. You're more than welcome to come back and say, can you elaborate more on that? I think it's a bit lacking.
I disagree most with the wisdom part so far. I think that you said humans are wise, but we do create things with no real meaning. And yes, this necessary being might be beyond our comprehension, but I don't think that necessitates every action they do having purpose. Because relative to, say, an ant, a human is this necessary being. We can create an environment. Those ant farms, that's an environment in which we have absolute power over their world. And yet, if I drop an apple into this ant farm versus a piece of lettuce, that's completely random. That's not a consequence of me being wise and thinking every molecule of that apple sliced through. That's just, it happened. To me, that choice didn't seem significant. I think that a necessary being on that scale would also kind of be zoned out from these things. What does a single planet in a single galaxy matter when you're thinking on the scales of an entire universe? So I think that as the scale increases, the consequences just matter less probably to this necessary being, the same way that to me an ant matters less.
Okay, so bear in mind the definition of a necessary being is something that's indivisible, has no beginning, like it doesn't come into existence, it's not composed of like they say, quote unquote, parts. That's the definition of a necessary being. So remember what I said, the necessary being is the end to the chain. So although to the ant we may seem as the necessary being, but they can see us, isn't it? So here we're talking philosophically and rationally. We're saying that rationally, if you keep going in the chain, like we may seem to the ant as a necessary being, however logically we're not, and practically we're not, because there is something that we depend upon as well, isn't it? And we are dependent upon certain things, that the ant will see that this person also, I don't know how ant thinks, we may need to sit down, we may, like after we've given something, we need to then move back and get something back again. Our hands are limited. I don't know if an ant can comprehend that, but at the very least, the end to that causal chain, the end to the of dependencies, is a necessary being that I'm talking about. I totally get what you're saying, which is that if we start attributing necessity to any little thing, I think it would become ridiculous, frankly. I mean, we'd be a necessary being to our cat probably, and a lion would be a necessary being to us. But bear in mind, the definition is it's reliance. Yeah, it's dependence. You're dependent upon that. The lion is dependent upon something else. So this necessary being is not dependent upon food. It's not dependent upon sustenance. It's not dependent on time and space, because time and space, according to the Big Bang, some will claim that it started at the Big Bang. But I mean, that's a whole other issue in itself. So yeah, and the other thing, you were making some really good points. So what do you think now about necessity? Does it make sense that it's the end to that causal chain? If something is dependent, like human being like us, that makes it void for us to be called a necessary being. Like logically, for us to even be here and standing, there has to be an end to that chain.
I'm still just not quite convinced. I agree with every stage of your argument, but then it all comes together, and I still just don't see why there has to be a necessary being. I still think that requires too much purposefulness. I don't think the universe is that purposeful enough to necessitate a god. I agree that there is an endpoint. I just don't see why that endpoint has to be a being that we've imagined.
Okay, I'm going to come back to this point because we're probably going to build on it. But the point before, I just remembered what you said before. You said human beings do things without a purpose. What examples would you be able to give me of such things?
I guess
Practical examples.
Yeah.
Not just for the sake of this discussion, you're like, aha. yeah.
I guess it's not so much about purposefulness, purposelessness. I guess it's more just coincidental, almost accidental choices we make, like the ant farm. What do I feed my ants today? I wouldn't put that much thought into that kind of stuff, which isn't what you asked for, but I think it's along the same lines of it's not purposeful as much.
But feeding an ant surely is.
Feeding an ant is the choice in the food. I'm on the spot. I'm trying to.
No problem. I'm not here to catch you out. Like I said, I mean, even if you come up with an example later on, I'll just be interested to hear about it. I'll tell you why I've asked you this, because I tend to argue with people that disbelieve in a God. I say that the criteria that you have for everyday life, for the evidence, the bar is set very low. But when it comes to, say, God, the bar is set very high. But just like even in science, we have the inference to the best explanation. Yeah, we have a set of choices and we say, you know what? Although I can't say for certain, I would say logically, rationally, the inference to the best explanation is this. So would you say the inference to the best explanation for us is that typically as we're journeying through life, because I mean an evolutionist would argue that for us to lead a purposeless life would mean that we would die. Because if you don't get up, if you don't go to sleep, if you don't eat, if you don't drink, if you don't procreate, if you don't cover yourself, if you don't go to work, if you don't study, if you don't have friends, all of these things have a negative consequence. If you don't have friends, you become unsocial. Then studies say that your life expectancy goes down. If you don't drink water, you become dehydrated. It affects your skin, and all of these sorts of things. So rationally, logically, human beings, yes, I'm not trying to say that, look, every single thing that we do has an obvious purpose, but there definitely is an underlying purpose. That Sigmund Freud, that's it. So Sigmund Freud calls it the id, that any choice that we make, most of it is the things that are in our unconscious mind. So it will be things that have affected you when you were young. It could be your relationship with your mother, relationship with your father, sort of things that you saw, because your mind when you're young is absorbing things like a sponge, why you're attracted to a certain individual and their characteristics as opposed to somebody else, why you like a certain color, why you like certain words, why you like certain numbers. You might think it's random, but it's all predicated on the things that you saw and you experienced when you were young. You say that makes sense?
Yeah.
So when now as human beings, I don't know about you, but I struggle to make an IKEA cupboard.
Oh, I love building IKEA cupboards actually.
But I struggle, yeah, you know why I struggle is because if I had some text accompanying those images, it would be so helpful.
Yeah.
But the fact that I'm just relying on an image, I'm there comparing the screws, like does that look like that, does that look like that? So it makes it really difficult. So my creative ability is very lacking. But when it comes to what we see around us, even if I give certain examples, the bioluminescence of fish, like I find these natural documentaries, some of them are quite fascinating, especially the one that really sticks out for me is Planet Earth. And I think another kind of series that came off Planet Earth had a series where the more deep you go into the ocean, it becomes darker and darker and darker, more pressure builds up. In fact, the first time that they went down there, they saw light. Now they say, let there be light. They didn't say that though. Maybe they were atheists. So when they went down there, they were fish with, and this is so hilarious, there was like a thing that was just dangling off the head with a light bulb.
Yeah.
So they call it bioluminescent fish. It's fantastic. Then you got the mandarin duck. Then you've got the homing instinct of a pigeon, migratory instinct of a bewick swan, and the echolocator system in that of a bat. And even when you look at a human being, it cries out design. Now, that's not the center of my argument, but even staunch atheists like Richard Dawkins says that when you look at the fine-tuning argument, to him, in his opinion, you're aware of Richard Dawkins, yeah. So Richard Dawkins says the fine-tuning argument, to him, was the most convincing. Fred Hoyle said something similar. In fact, he said that when I was looking at carbon, which is the main element of our existence, like human beings are made primarily of carbon. If you look at how carbon's made, one of the ways that it's made is 3 heliums coming together makes carbon. So helium was one of the primary elements of the universe. So he said that I tried to kind of make them come together, but he said it just wasn't happening. I tried everything, it was just so frustrating. But he said that the nuclear ground state energy has to be within 1% for the 3 heliums to come together for a carbon to form. And he's on record as saying that there's nothing that shook my atheism as much as that. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen to you, but what I'm saying is that there are people that are even more skeptical that have conceded that, you know what, because for us to say that it's not designed, I mean, the mere fact that we go out, there's tourism, there are naturalists, zoologists that are studying, and you had the light microscope, then the electron microscope. The more you kind of go into creation or nature, the more you realize there's more for us to see. And the way it's intricately designed or intricately present, it does beg the question, how? Why? Because I'll tell you, like, when somebody says, look, you come into a kitchen, you see a cup of tea there. Person says, no, I mean, you and me are in the home, why is there a random cup of tea in the kitchen?